Here is exactly how to build a second brain using Obsidian as an online coach. And we're going to go on a very special journey today and build a second brain together. So if you're not sold on why you should have a second brain, here's what we're going to cover. But just remember that as an online coach, you are a knowledge worker. Clients are coming to you for your expertise, for your synthesis and structuring of knowledge. They're relying on you. They're putting their trust in you to bring them the best of your expertise. And where are you holding all that information? If it's just in your head at the mercy of how you feel on a given day, then that's a terrible system. You can't escape this choice. So a lack of a system is still a system. It's just a bad one. So you have to have a second brain. It's your duty to your clients. It will also help you to stop having to repeat yourself, because you'll be able to build the gold standard version of any of your client resources. It'll help you to define what are the core pillars of your content so that you can create the best content for your clients. And the thing that really excites me is that writing clarifies your thinking. So even if it's just for your own purposes to get better at mastering your craft, it will level you up as a coach. Being able to allow the structure and the crystallization of your knowledge and learning to compound is an incredible thing. So how do we do it? And why have I set this up as a note in Obsidian? So what I want us to do is to build a second brain together, and you can join me along with this. I'm going to explain why you should be using Obsidian at all, why not Apple Notes, for example, and what the difference is, and why I'm just so excited about the idea of building a second brain. So you will have seen me talk about Apple Notes in the past. I still use it, but I think it's very good for things like administrative stuff and tax management and insurance documents, and just keeping an archive of general boring documents that you need to use. But if you're building a knowledge and wisdom management system, you want to use something like Obsidian. And the reason for that is that over time, your notes link to each other, they compound, they start to build on each other, you can assemble stuff, and it's a dedicated vault that's used for that. And if I was starting again, I'd probably just go all in on Obsidian. So you're at least skipping the queue, you're jumping past all of my errors and things. What I'm currently doing is consolidating all of the stuff that's to do with knowledge management and anything that I want to be evergreened, and I'm moving it over into my Obsidian vault, along with journal entries and synthesized lessons from various things, and trying to put everything into Obsidian. The other massive benefit that you've seen me talk about is Readwise, which integrates with Obsidian. So anything that you read, whether it's an article or a book or even a transcript from a YouTube video, it just goes straight into your Obsidian, and then you can start connecting those thoughts. Anyway, I have other resources on this stuff. I don't want to labor the point too much, but that's why not to just use Apple Notes. The other thing is, should you just have your tasks and your notes and everything in one place? No, tasks are very different. You don't want the idea that you have to buy some sellotape on Friday to be forever immortalized in your second brain. The other thing is, why not use Notion? So Notion is great for online collaborative stuff. So you've seen my video on client management with Notion. Brilliant for that, brilliant for team management, for project work, and for content planning. But this is a different purpose. So hopefully you can see why different tools have a different need and why they should be separate. So for tasks, by the way, the tool that I love is TickTick, and you've got lots of videos on our channel that you can work through on how to use TickTick for an ultimate task management system. Right, so we have got the caveats out of the way. Now onto Obsidian and why it's so powerful. So first of all, Markdown, this is something that I kind of resisted for a while. It's being able to basically format notes by typing different symbols. So if I want to make a heading, I can do hashtag, and then that turns it into that. If I want to make a subheading, you type 2 hashes, and then the Markdown disappears as you move along. That way you can fold things into nodes, so you can fold it up like that. You can use a keyboard shortcut to do the same thing. And then bolding, you can either just put a star on either side of the text, or you can just press Command B. The reason that Markdown exists is that if Obsidian goes bust as a company and everything goes to pot, you haven't lost your notes. You've got something that can be imported into any other system and it's still totally working and functional. And so Markdown's kind of one of these like things that in 100 years time, if you dig up the sand and you find an old Markdown document, it's still passable by any text editor. So we've covered Markdown. Now the really exciting part is linking, and this is where Obsidian really comes to life. So David Perel says that modern writing is not created, it's assembled. And if I switch to my main vault, which I'm building over time, you'll see that what I've got here is the principles of writing. And what I want to try and express to you is that this is what happens when you start assembling notes rather than creating them. So you've got atomic notes. These are the individual molecular pieces of notes, just little scraps of ideas. And then they become bigger ideas, and then they get plugged together like bits of Lego that start building larger and larger structures until you end up with a map of content. So, for example, this note on writing is an index page because it pulls together embedded areas from other notes about taking smart notes and how writing is really multiple steps. There's not just one thing called writing. There's reading, there's idea generation, there's making connections, and there's summarizing. And the fact that you're doing nothing from scratch, and so you're using your second brain, for example, to do the lifting. And then those things can have idea sets. And you can see how, as I'm clicking through these different notes, you can see that each of these are atomic ideas that are all connected through this index note. And that's why once you start building a critical mass of different notes, they start to take form and they become this emergent structure, and it's beautiful. So writing then just becomes assembling, and you feel a bit more like you're putting Lego together rather than having to do this laborious task of writing something new each time. Also, you can then see that Obsidian automatically finds mentions of the word writing, both linked and unlinked, and then you can go in and actually link them all together if you want to. So it does that for you. Now here's the cool part. Ready for this? It can generate a local graph. So this is anything that's connected to writing and seeing how it all fits together. And then I can see the depth, so I can see what connects to those things as well. And so how writing is then connected to further second order links. And then what I can also do is see how the whole graph fits together. So this is still quite an early stage vault for me. I'm still in the process of moving over to Obsidian. But you can see how you've got these big sections which are tags for me, and they can be moved around. It's quite fun to play around with the physics of them. And you can see different levels of granularity as you kind of zoom in and out, so that you can see where are the clusters of topics in your second brain. So we've seen the progression of how the emergent structure has come about, but how would you get started with just creating a second brain from nothing? Well, the great thing about this is that you can be messy and scrappy and just create little post-it notes and scraps as you go along, and they will connect together and form this emergent structure. Or you can be structured and create a map of content, and you can kind of move between those styles of thinking. And that's why it's so flexible. So let's start with something scrappy. Let's say you've just read an article about carbohydrates and you wanted to quickly get down some stuff about the structure. So we use Markdown to create a header here, and we say that there are polysaccharide chains that split into sugars, simple carbs versus complex. We can say the nutritional effects, and we can talk about the muscle preservation effects, effects on protein, if I can spell it properly, protein synthesis. We can talk about the impact on satiety. So we've got a few different concepts here, and you could flesh these out over time. But right now we've got the central carbohydrates note. And what I can also do is create a potential link to a new note. And the way that we do that is just selecting a word, and then you just double tap, open bracket, and that'll create the word polysaccharide or sugar. So let's select that and say link to sugar, or protein, or satiety. So now look what happens. If I click on any of these, that's created the new notes for those things. So now what we've done is we've already linked carbohydrates to multiple other concepts. And if we go back to the graph view, we can see here that we've got carbohydrates linked to these other things, and we can also display the direction of those links too in the arrow. So that's looking pretty cool now. And then over time, you can see how those would pop out and become more and more complex. So then we can start talking about sugar and saying, maybe talking about sugar addiction and the bliss point of sugar, salt and fat. And you can see now that we want to create a page for fat and we want to create one for salt. And if we go to protein, we can say, okay, what are the different sources? So there's meat, there's pork, chicken, fish, lamb, or there's vegetarian sources of tofu and whey and hemp and pea protein, whatever it is. And then we've got satiety. And if, let's say I want to change this because satiety, that might not come to mind if I'm searching the word satiety here. I might think, oh, it's more like hunger. So let's add that in as well. And then we can talk about, say, always update. So the internal links will always change. So when I go back to carbohydrates, see how it's already updated the name of that. So this is pretty cool. And then also you can preview what those things would look like by hovering over them. So if I want to embed this protein bit into here, I can actually do that by typing protein, but then I can put an exclamation mark in front. And then that's just put that in there. So now if I update this, it'll update everywhere. So if I go to protein and I say, actually, I want to add in some vegan sources. And then the vegan source could be plum eggs or orange meat or mango liver, something like that. Then we have, going back to here, we can see that it's updated in there. And now these connections are becoming more and more complex. So have a play around with that. What it also means is that I can now create, let's say, a new node that's just called nutrition, and that has everything in it. So I want to cover the entire content map of nutrition. And so I've got the nutritional pyramid here. I might want to talk about energy balance, calories, macronutrients. So then I can create a mega node for macronutrients. I can then link to carbohydrates, protein, fat. Okay, so you can see how this is creating this emergent structure that over time those nodes thicken, and then you end up with lots of connections, and that helps with your memory and your recall and stuff too. So then if you ever have to create something from scratch, you've already got the building blocks and you can start putting them together. Now let's try one more thing. Let's say I'm reading an article about pre-workout carbs for maximum strength performance. So I'm reading this in Readwise, and let's say I go along and I want to say, okay, let's highlight that. Higher volume workouts require higher carbohydrate intake. Okay, fine. So I've highlighted that, and then if I go to my other vault and I sync Readwise, we will see that this highlight will appear in its own note with pre-workout carbs. So if I search pre-workout carbs, here we are. It's brought in who the author is, it's categorized it, and it's brought in my highlight. And so now I can see how that's connected to Menno Henselmans, the author, and it's floating there. And if I have other notes in there as well related to carbohydrates and things, I could start collecting those in the linked and unlinked mentions too. So you can see how powerful this would become. So we've talked about assembling writing. The other thing you can do is you can create folders in here if you wanted to. I mean, folders are actually kind of redundant at this stage because everything's linked through the graph. But if you wanted to, you could move these into different folders. So we've got nutrition, you can drag them in. And we've talked about the graph and how you can use that to kind of surf ideas and see what's connected to what. And you can also identify orphaned notes. So this untitled note isn't linked to anything. So we can click on that and figure out what's going on here and why it's not connected to anything, in this case because it's blank. So let's go back to this. the final thing is we have the canvas. So if I want to create a canvas here, this allows me to create notes from the vault. So I can drag in carbohydrates here, and then I can connect it visually to something else. And I can add a card. I can say how this pastries, I don't know. And then that can connect to another existing note about sugar. And so you can create things in a bit more of a deliberately visual way. You can then make groups and you can drag those things around. So you can play around with a slightly more visual kind of mind mappy style of thinking as well. And you can make flowcharts. So that's quite useful. Once you've got this chaotic graph of notes, you can then start to synthesize it into an order and a sequence that you've chosen to do, a bit like you're playing with cards on a table. So we've talked about that. We've talked about evergreening and how if I update this note, that updates everywhere else. And so then these atomic notes become actually quite useful and everything stays up to date in your system. Now, what are some things that might make your life a bit more useful? I'd recommend playing around with some plugins. If you go to settings in Obsidian and search for community plugins, you can find a whole repository of plugins in here. So the ones that I would recommend would be various complements and strange new worlds. So if we go here, strange new worlds, let's install that. And complements. These are all user-generated plugins, so use them at your own risk. Obsidian aren't checking the code of this stuff, but what you can do here is now find words as you're typing. So the various complements one basically means that if I was to start typing protein in here, it automatically finds, there's a link already called protein and suggests the link to you. And that just helps you to build up those webs of links a lot faster. Strange New Worlds is kind of similar. It'll find words that are linked. So if I go to the nutrition map, for example, as I hover over, I can see where that word is mentioned in other places. And that shows it in line in the notes rather than just at the bottom in the linked and unlinked mentions. So yeah, it's very extensible. You can completely customize it to how you want it to. And I would recommend just exploring it. Don't get overwhelmed with the number of things, just do it piecemeal. So figure out what it is that you need, and then over time, you'll start to build things up. So there we are. There is how to get started with Obsidian, of building a second brain. Hopefully you can see the value and the utility in doing this. And it means that over time, you never have to, if you have to write an article about nutrient timing, you've got all the stuff already there. You just have to assemble the bits together and drag the pieces into the right sequence to create something new. So what's next? So I have a video series called Building a Wisdom Management System, of how to really zoom out from all of this and put those pieces together and crystallize the knowledge that we were talking about, and how to pick the right app for that for that purpose. I've also got a content process. So we cover it in full depth in our paid program, but also we've got a video called How to Beat the Social Media Algorithm Without Being Glued to Your Phone. So that covers scripting, content idea generation, recording, publishing, scheduling, repurposing, all that stuff, and how to do it pretty much on autopilot. So definitely have a look at that if you're an online coach and you're producing content. And if you are new to us, make sure to watch our full overview on how to become a successful, profitable online coach, and how we built Propane Fitness up to 10 to 15K per month with online group coaching. So we cover the full thing in full detail. And if you want to, you can always have a chat with us and discuss your situation further. All right, speak to you soon. You have made it to the end of this video, so I have a special gift for you. I need you to follow this very specific set of steps. So step 1, click the subscribe button below. Step 2, go to the description of this video and follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. I guarantee we will level up the quality of your Instagram feed, your Twitter feed, and therefore the quality of your thoughts and your bank account. Step 3, click the link below that and join the Propane Inner Circle. You get free access to our 7 days to 1K as an online coach program, as well as the online coaching blueprint. And then if you don't want to do any of that and you just want to speak to us directly to work with us, then click the link below that and you can book in a time slot to have a chat with one of the team. Speak soon.